The separation papers hit my chest before Graham Pierce looked at my face. And that told me exactly how long he had been practicing cruelty. "Sign it tonight, Daphne," he breathed, calm enough to scare me. "Or leave this house by Friday and stop making this ugly." I sat on our bed in the Lake of the Isles house my mother's trust had bought before he ever touched my last name. The same bed where he once promised babies and Sunday mornings now held a folder thick enough to erase me before dinner. Maris Adler's name was not on the papers, but her perfume lived on his collar. Sweet, expensive, and careless. Then Graham gave me the sentence he must have polished for weeks, because even his mercy sounded rehearsed and colder than the Minnesota glass behind him. "Maris is moving in after the separation," he warned, watching my mouth for a crack. "And you can stay only if you accept reality." 3 years of marriage narrowed into 2 choices he thought he owned: dignity without shelter, or shelter purchased by swallowing his affair. I picked up the pen from the nightstand, felt no tremor in my fingers, and understood my body had already stopped asking him for mercy. When I signed Daphne Ward in clean blue ink, page after page, Graham smiled like a man watching a lock turn from his side. He did not notice the exhibit clipped behind the agreement, the one his own lawyer had attached and his arrogance had skipped. He only saw a wife signing herself smaller, while I saw the first clean edge of the trap closing around him so neatly. Graham grabbed the papers from my lap so fast the top page tore against the staple, and his face changed before he found language. The exhibit was clipped behind the separation agreement, labeled in clean legal print, listing every non-marital asset he had assumed belonged to him. "No," he muttered. Not to me, but to the paper, as if ink could apologize for betraying his confidence. I watched his thumb stop on the townhouse, the investment account, the trust schedule, and the vehicle title held outside our marriage. "You made me sign the prenup, Graham," I reminded him, keeping my voice low enough that he had to listen instead of perform. That document had protected my mother's inheritance from any future claim, provided I never mixed it with our joint money or his name. I had not mixed it. Not once. Not when he begged. Not when he called my caution insulting and cold. Renee Kessler had checked every statement, every transfer, every trust record, and the woman Graham thought was cornered had been reading quietly. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out, so I reached into the nightstand and pulled out the cream folder. Inside were bank statements, vendor invoices, Maris Adler's LLC deposits, and 2 emails where she discussed my leaving like a scheduling problem. "You wanted me to sign," I said, placing the folder between us. "So I signed exactly what your lawyer attached." Graham stared at the pages, finally understanding that the wrong woman had obeyed him, and obedience had become the blade. 6 months earlier, the first wrong thing was not lipstick or perfume, but a tasting invoice charged on a Tuesday Graham called business travel. The vendor name looked harmless until Hannah Pike searched it and found Maris Adler's LLC behind the polished catering description. I did not confront him that night, because Graham had trained every question into proof that I was unstable. So I smiled through dinner, cleared our plates, and saved the statement into a folder he believed I could never build. The second wrong thing arrived on the family iPad, where Maris sent one careless email into the account Graham forgot was connected. "Once she is out by Friday, we can reset the house before the sponsor dinner." It read, plain enough to quiet my skin. That sentence told me Maris was not waiting for love. She was waiting for square footage, access, and my silence. I met Hannah at a North Loop cafe 2 days later, sliding statements across the table while my coffee went untouched. Hannah did not comfort me first. She took out a pen and circled payments matching hotel nights, event deposits, and Maris's invoices. "This is not messy," she murmured, tapping the paper once. "This is patterned," and that word changed the temperature in my chest. From then on, I lived inside my marriage like a woman gathering stormwater in cups. Quietly. Carefully. Without spilling. Every late meeting became a calendar note. Every envelope became a scan. And every insult Graham threw at my questions became another reason to wait. Renee Kessler confirmed what I needed most. He could threaten, but he could not throw me out without legal process. The house belonged to my mother's trust. My records were clean, and his confidence depended on me staying too frightened to read. So while Graham came home smelling like expensive restaurants and rehearsed annoyance, I learned his lies from the receipts he dismissed. By the night he pushed those papers into my hands, I had already memorized every hidden door he thought belonged to him. Maris Adler became real to me through language before she became a woman I could hate. Because her emails had a personality. She did not write like someone confused by a married man's promises. She wrote like someone managing a transition plan. In one message, she told Graham not to apologize too much because guilt made weak men expensive. And I read it twice. That sentence stayed in my hands longer than any perfume on his shirt, because it proved she understood the weapon before he swung it. She knew my name, my schedule, my absence from work, and the loneliness Graham had packaged as my personal weakness. Her invoices moved through harmless descriptions: private tasting, guest curation, seasonal sourcing, each one attached to money he claimed was household spending. When Renee reviewed the records, she did not call Maris a mistress first. She called her a third party receiving marital funds. That phrase stripped the romance off the affair and left only what remained: access, planning, and a woman billing my marriage. I did not call Maris, because rage would have given her the warning she needed to clean her edges. Instead, I let her keep sending polished little instructions while Graham grew careless under the comfort of being admired. One draft email carried the line that finally closed my throat: she has no income. No family here. No reason to fight. I stared at those words until they stopped hurting and started arranging themselves into evidence. By the time Graham threw the papers at me, Maris had already helped design the room he thought I would crawl out of. She wanted my house without my shadow, my silence without my name, and Graham's status without the inconvenience of his wife. What neither of them understood was simple enough to fit inside one folder. They had not found a woman with no reason to fight. They had handed one a reason with signatures attached. Graham sat on the edge of our bed with the papers spread across his knees, suddenly smaller than the man who had entered. I placed the prenup beside the trust schedule, then the bank statements beside Maris Adler's invoices, letting each page answer for me. His fingers moved over the dates, as if touching them gently could change what they proved about him. "Daphne, I was trying to see if you still cared," he managed, and the weakness in that excuse almost made me laugh. "You tested the locks after you set the fire," I answered, and his eyes dropped because even he heard the truth land. The room held every choice he thought he had taken from me. The house, the money, the silence, the shame. I told him he had 72 hours to leave. No visits from Maris, no withdrawals from joint accounts, and no contact outside lawyers. "You cannot evict me from a home you do not own," I reminded him, folding the signed pages back into order. "Renee already sent your attorney the occupancy notice, and if you fight it, discovery starts with her invoices." His face tightened when he understood Maris would not stay safely outside the paperwork, scented and untouched by consequences. "Are you trying to ruin me?" slipped out of him, softer than a threat and uglier than fear. I looked at the email where Maris had written that I had no reason to fight, then slid it across his lap. "No, Graham, I'm letting your own documents introduce you properly," I said, watching his hand close around nothing. He reached for his phone, then stopped, because calling her meant admitting the stage they built had collapsed under both of them. "Call Maris now," I told him, and the command sounded strange in my mouth only because it fit so well. He dialed with trembling hands. "Put her on speaker." and said the house was not his. The agreement had failed, and I was not leaving. Silence came first, long enough to make the room feel newly honest. Then Maris asked, sharp and stunned, "Then where are we supposed to host the dinner?" Maris had planned the sponsor dinner inside my home like the house was already widowed, already stripped of me before dessert ever reached the table. Graham had promised her the long dining room, the lake-facing windows, and an address that made private donors answer invitations before reading details. When the house vanished from under her plan, she did not ask whether I was hurt or whether the divorce had turned uglier. She snapped through Graham's speaker. What am I supposed to tell the sponsors now? And that told me exactly what she had loved most. I did not post her emails, send screenshots to strangers, or turn my marriage into a public bonfire built for cheap applause. Renee sent one clean notice to the vendors, stating the property belonged to my trust and no event had permission to use it. The wording was polite enough to sound boring, which made it more dangerous than any accusation I could have written from anger. By noon, the florist withdrew. The wine consultant paused delivery, and the first sponsor requested updated venue documentation before releasing payment. That phrase moved faster through Maris's world than gossip, because upscale people forgive messiness much sooner than they forgive legal exposure. Graham's aviation contacts were tangled with the guest list, and suddenly his private embarrassment had a calendar, a paper trail, and outside witnesses. Maris tried calling it a misunderstanding, but the invoice carried my address, Graham's approval, and no signature from the woman who owned it. I sat at the kitchen island, watching withdrawal emails arrive. Not smiling, just breathing easier as their borrowed room finally returned to its owner. Renee filed the response 2 mornings later, and nothing about it sounded dramatic, which was exactly why Graham's attorney went quiet. The petition did not accuse him of ruining my life. It asked for disclosure, tracing, reimbursement, and protection of non-marital property. Minnesota did not need my heartbreak to divide a marriage fairly, and Renee made sure every claim had a document attached. The house belonged to my mother's trust. The investment account stayed clean, and the money Graham sent Maris carried dates he could not soften. His lawyer tried one hard letter first, all posture and polished threats, until Renee answered with the invoices and Maris's own email. After that, the tone changed so quickly I could almost hear Graham learning the price of discovery through someone else's keyboard. If he fought, Maris could be subpoenaed about her LLC, the sponsor dinner, and payments disguised as household expenses. He can argue feelings all day, Renee told me, but he cannot cross-examine a bank statement into loving him. Hannah built the cleanest timeline I had ever seen, with dates, charges, hotel nights, and event deposits aligned like locked doors. Each line proved a small choice. Not one drunken mistake, not one blurred weekend, but months of money moving toward another woman. Graham had called me paranoid when I asked why household spending looked strange, and now those charges sat under his attorney's letterhead. I touched the paper and felt less powerful than awake, because evidence does not shout. It waits until denial runs out. Then Graham offered his first surrender disguised as negotiation, asking to keep the car if I kept Maris out of the formal record. Renee read his message aloud, and I understood he still believed my silence was something he could buy back cheaply. The car belonged to the trust, Maris belonged to the evidence, and Graham belonged to the consequences he had scheduled himself. So I agreed to privacy only if he signed the settlement without contest. And for once, he chose damage control over pride. Maris tried to survive the fallout by calling herself misled, but her own email kept standing up before she could sit down anywhere. She told one sponsor Graham exaggerated our separation, yet once she is out by Friday, sat inside Renee's packet like a signed confession. People in Maris's world did not need a moral lecture from me. Only fraud risk attached to an event invoice with my address printed. By that week's end, One partnership froze. Another sponsor withdrew. And her polished calendar started losing rooms she had claimed with such confidence. The woman who wanted my home for status had to explain why her best venue belonged to the wife she planned around. The only time I saw her afterward was outside Renee's office, where Maris looked expensive and suddenly underdressed, for consequences she finally recognized. She stopped beside me with a folder pressed to her ribs, borrowing confidence from Graham, though even he had stopped sounding certain. "He told me you were already gone," she whispered, and I looked at the invoice carrying my address and his approval in black ink. Women who are already gone do not need deadlines, and innocent people do not bill the wife's household account. I answered without heat. Her attorney led her away before embarrassment became performance, and Maris lost the client circle that made her feel untouchable by Tuesday afternoon. She returned part of the disputed money through settlement reimbursement, not from Grace, but because her records had become too clear. The bank questioned her LLC deposits. One sponsor canceled future tasting work, and the rooms she wanted began closing without anyone raising a voice. She was not ruined in some theatrical way. She simply became too expensive, too messy, and too documented for the people she wanted most. Graham left within 72 hours, and the house sounded larger after his suitcases stopped dragging across the hallway floors. On the kitchen counter, he left a letter folded under the spare key, as if neat paper could make surrender look considered. I read it standing barefoot on the tile, still wearing the sweater he once said made me look too serious. He wrote that he had only wanted to see whether I would fight for us, and the sentence made my stomach go quiet. He called his cruelty fear, his planning confusion, and his ultimatum a test that had accidentally revealed how far gone I was. He never wrote Maris's name until the third paragraph, where he said she had complicated something already broken. I folded the letter carefully, not because it mattered, but because evidence deserved better storage than grief ever did. It went into the same folder as her invoices, his threats, and the agreement he thought would erase me. That afternoon, April Stowe asked what winning felt like, and I hated how long I needed before answering her. I told her it felt safe, then empty, like I had escaped a burning room and still smelled smoke in my hair. 6 months of watching, scanning, saving, and waiting had made me sharper, but sharpness was not the same as peace. April did not soften what I had done or dress it up as empowerment for my comfort. She looked at the letter in my hands and said, "Survival often wears a face we would never choose otherwise." That was the first time I understood why victory had not warmed me, even after Graham lost everything he tried to take. The house still belonged to me, but every wall remembered a version of Daphne who had learned to disappear quietly. So I decided to sell it. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted a future without his echo. 1 year later, I lived downtown in a smaller apartment with better light, fewer rooms, and nothing Graham Pierce had ever chosen for me. The closing money from the Lake of the Isles house sat in an account under my name alone, clean enough to feel almost unreal. I did not keep the house to prove I had won, because winning was never the same thing as wanting to stay. I signed the sale papers at Renee Kessler's office with the same hand that had signed Graham's trap, only steadier this time. My new studio started with 3 clients, then 7, all women rebuilding brands after someone else had tried to define them publicly. I helped them choose language that did not apologize for survival, and slowly my own voice stopped sounding borrowed in my mouth. Hannah Pike came for dinner every other Friday, bringing wine, spreadsheets, and the kind of friendship that never asked me to shrink first. April Stowe still asked hard questions, but now my answers arrived from somewhere softer than fear and less interested in punishment. Graham lost his operations role after an internal review made his expense reports harder to explain than his ruined marriage. He took a quieter job outside the city, and his name stopped appearing in rooms where he used to perform certainty. Maris Adler kept working small events, But the sponsor circle she wanted never reopened after her invoices became part of a divorce file. Neither of them vanished, and that felt more real than fantasy. Because consequences rarely scream when they can simply close doors. I bought a mirror for my entryway with money no one else had touched, and I hung it where morning light reached first. Some days I saw the woman who became cold enough to survive, and some days I saw the woman returning behind her. Both were mine, and both had carried me from a bed where I was ordered to disappear into a life I chose. Thank you for staying with Daphne's story until the end. And if her silence or strength felt familiar, share your thoughts below. Sometimes peace begins when we stop begging to be chosen and finally choose the life that can hold us gently.